What's going on, everybody? Good morning. Hope you guys are doing well on this Monday, the start of a new week, the first week post exciting off-season stuff. Although, look for some stuff to happen either later today or later this week. A lot of people believe that the Dante Fowler stuff is going to happen, and if it does happen, I will be talking about it. But that's not what we're going to be talking about today. I want to talk about some leftover thoughts from the 2026 NFL Draft. I want to talk about some of the buzz going around that might shed a little bit of light on this draft class and maybe, just maybe, might make some people feel a little bit better about it. And that includes me here because I'm one of the people that doesn't necessarily love everything about this draft class. But got some things to look at here. This video is sponsored by Prize Picks. So first thing I want to talk about in this video is Chris Johnson. Chris Johnson, he was one of my favorites going into draft day. Let me move my mic a little bit here. The shadow, just realized it's casting on my face a little bit funky. But yeah, so Chris Johnson, he went 27th to the Miami Dolphins, and a lot of people wondered, was Seattle going to take him if he fell to 32? Were the Seahawks going to take Chris Johnson if he was there? And I suspect the answer may have been yes, but I'm not working with inside information when I say that. So let's talk about a couple people who are. So first you've got this from Brady Henderson. And this was the 24th. So this was, what was this? Day... Yeah, this was day 2. So this was obviously after the day 1 was well in the books. But what he said in this tweet was, I don't think the Seahawks loved seeing Chris Johnson go 27th, but I don't think that they minded that he was one of only 2 corners to go in round 1. So the rest of this tweet is just talking about other guys they could have drafted maybe at 64. Of course, they ended up getting Julian Neal at 96. But what Brady Henderson is intimating here is that he believes the Seahawks would have drafted Chris Johnson, or at least would have strongly considered it if Chris Johnson was there. Now, he wasn't there and there wasn't anything we can do about it, so don't get me wrong, I'm not criticizing the team here. This is not their fault. But I do wonder if that was plan A, and I believe that Corbin Smith said some things that indicated he thought there was a good chance that was the case. A couple other people have as well, including, and this is kind of the interesting hammer here, Dan Viennes of Seahawks Forever tweeted this out yesterday evening, and I thought that this was really interesting. And if it's true, this is casting things in a little bit of a new light. Is it a good light or a bad light? Up to you. I speculated on the show that Chris Johnson would have been plan A if he'd made it to 32, and I was just informed that indeed that is correct. So if you believe Dan Viennes and his source, then the Seahawks were going to take Chris Johnson if he made it there. But the second part is really interesting. Here's the twist. If that had happened, they would have then attempted to trade up in the second round to get Jadarian Price. That would have been a really interesting one too, and it may have cost them a good chunk of their remaining draft capital for the rest of this draft, and probably even a couple of things from next year's draft. I don't know exactly what a trade-up would have looked like, but it sounds like they had a plan to get 2 guys that they thought would really help them in 2026 and beyond. And I'll tell you, on the surface, this sounds pretty great to me. If you like sports, the best way to make them better and more exciting is using Prize Picks, where it always feels good to be right. Prize Picks, all you got to do is pick more or less on your favorite players' projections and build lineups with a few taps. It's the daily fantasy stuff, but it's made super easy over there. Whatever sport you're into, give it a shot. And right now, Prize Picks is hooking up users with $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. All you have to do is use promo code HMA. I've had a great time on Prize Picks so far. It makes this daily fantasy thing very easy, and it makes watching the games way more exciting. Be sure to check out the social feeds feature so you can share lineups with your friends and tail partners or even fade their picks. Right now, Prize Picks is offering odds on the NFL Draft. You have who's going to go where, what each team is going to do, how many of each position is going to go in each round, and so on and so on. Get on over to Prize Picks. Take advantage of that. So download Prize Picks today, America's #1 sports app, and remember to use the promo code HMA. And remember, always gamble responsibly. Because now you're getting a player that I absolutely believe was worthy of 32 in terms of the value he provides. I've talked about Chris Johnson at length, why he would be great. So that would have been great at 32. And then if you trade up to get Jadarian Price anyway, then you're drafting him in the range where I think it's understandable. If you get Jadarian Price even in the late 30s, I think that's okay. In the 40s, even better. I just didn't believe he was necessarily worth it at 32. So if this had happened, that would have been kind of a deadly one too. That would have kind of completely made me comfortable with the draft haul just on the basis of those two guys, because I would have had a pretty strong belief that we had done well in terms of value and immediate need, because Chris Johnson would have played some as a rookie. But the question is, and this is the interesting part here, if you buy this, if you believe that this is true, if they were really close to just going Chris Johnson trade up for Jadarian Price, that means they're giving up probably their 3rd round pick and probably a pick next year. So at that point, it means you're not getting Bud Clark, right? You're not going to get Bud Clark, the safety. You might instead get, well, I don't even know who was available at our 6th round pick. Not much, right? I know that there were safeties available, but there weren't any covetable ones. So you don't get Bud Clark in that scenario. And you're also probably less likely to get Bo Stevens. In fact, you can still get Bo Stevens because you're trading the future pick from 2027. But if you already gave up one 2027 pick to get Jadarian Price, maybe you're not so willing to give up the other 2027 pick to get Bo Stevens. So now you're kind of bringing in a couple other things to the recipe here, because you didn't have to make that trade up to get Price. So it is a little bit of a trade-off here. And I will admit, my belief in Chris Johnson being great in this defense still kind of has me preferring to get him and Price rather than Price, Clark, Neal, and Bo Stevens. But I will say this, I like Julian Neal. I think that Neal is going to be a good player. So when you put it like that, it kind of becomes an interesting discussion, doesn't it? Right? In both scenarios, you get Price, but in one scenario, you probably only get Johnson, whereas in the other, you get Neal, Clark, and Stevens. So let me know what you guys think about that. So that's number one. Number two, and the other thing I want to talk about in this video, is something with Jadarian Price. And we will never know what actually happened here. We will never know the truth. Anybody who thinks they know for a fact is just blowing smoke. And the people who do actually know have no incentive to be honest. But one thing to think about here is that we don't know if we could have even gotten Price later in the 2nd round. Like Dan Vien says, we would have traded up in the 2nd round to get Price. Would that have been possible? A lot of people are saying, well, the next running back to go was Kalon Black to the 49ers, and he went in the, what was it? Hold on, let me check that real quick. Yeah, he went 90th overall, so late-ish 3rd round. But that doesn't necessarily mean Jadarian Price would have fallen anywhere near that far, and maybe he wouldn't have fallen at all, like not even one spot. So Corbin Smith has this tweet here talking about how Price was head and shoulders above the next good running backs in the class. Love, obviously, head and shoulders above him, and then Price head and shoulders above everybody else, which I think is reasonable. I don't totally agree, but it is a defensible position. But one thing that Corbin Smith touches on here is that the 49ers were picking at 33. They ended up taking Stribling. They may have taken Price at 33. So if that happens, you're not going to get him. You're not even close to getting him. So if that is indeed the case, then you couldn't have waited on Price. So this is another way to look at things that I think is very interesting. If Price was going to be gone by the time you got to the 40s or 50s, and you really wanted him, then you had to take him at 32. The Niners clearly needed a running back. Price fits their offense. He fits their scheme. There's a reason why we drafted him with Brian Fleury as our offensive coordinator. So maybe there wasn't an opportunity to trade back and still get him. Maybe trading back would have just meant you don't get Johnson or Price. You end up getting Brandon Cisse or something. And I love Brandon Cisse, don't get me wrong, not saying anything bad about that, but it's not the same. So some stuff to think about here. I'm going to continue to echo what I've said before. This all comes back to the Seahawks desperately needing a running back going into draft day. And that's just not something that I'm going to be interested in defending. Yes, it's an explanation. It's not an excuse. Don't put yourself in a situation where you have to get a running back in the draft. This is not a very good running back class. There was one superstar, one blue chipper, and then there was one player that was perceived as being quite good, and then everybody else was kind of like, take it or leave it. You should not be going into the draft with a massive hole at the running back spot. And because you did, maybe you had to do something that you normally would not have done. I don't know. We'll never know for sure. But I don't think that excuses what the team did. It maybe just explains it. But even then, even with me saying that, I want to stress, what they did was not that bad. I'm not sitting here saying Jadarian Price is bad. I don't think it's a terrible pick. I don't even necessarily think it's a bad pick. I just think it's flawed. And I think the approach that we took to get to the point where we took him is also flawed. But this perspective to me is very compelling. Would you rather get Price and Johnson or Price, Neal, Clark, and Stevens? Because that was probably the choice that you had in front of you. All right, see you guys later. Go Hawks. Let me know what you think. More videos coming soon.